I can still feel my hands shaking when I opened it. The envelope. His handwriting on the front. 8 years after he died, and he was still talking to me. He had been waiting for me to be ready. I almost wasn't. I almost threw it away. 8 years of dust covered the handle. This thick gray layer that came off on my fingers the second I touched it. And I just stood there in the garage holding it, thinking, why am I doing this today? Why now? My husband kept asking me if I was okay, and I kept saying, yes, I'm fine. And then I'd just stand there again, staring at it. It's a big red metal toolbox. Nothing fancy. The kind you'd find at any hardware store. The kind every dad in every suburb in America probably has in the back of his garage. But this one had been sitting in the same spot for 8 years, 2 months, and 11 days. I know that because I counted. I don't know why I counted. I just did. I hadn't been able to open it. Hadn't been able to touch it, really. After my dad died, I moved it to the corner, put a drop cloth over it, and just let it become part of the background. The way grief works sometimes. You don't deal with it. You just let it get dusty. His name was Gerald. Everyone called him Jerry. He was 61 years old when he died, which honestly still doesn't feel real to me, because 61 is not old. 61 is a Tuesday morning. 61 is still supposed to have more Christmases in it. He had a heart attack in the driveway. Our driveway, the one he'd repaved himself with a buddy of his the summer before, because he said the cracks were getting embarrassing, and he was gone before the ambulance even got there. That's the part I keep coming back to. He was fine on Thursday. We talked on the phone about the weather and about whether I was eating enough vegetables. And on Friday, he was gone. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. So the toolbox stayed. And I told myself I'd go through it someday. But someday never came. Until a Sunday in March, about 8 weeks ago, when I was cleaning out the garage to make room for some things, and I picked it up. I don't know what changed. Maybe nothing changed. Maybe I was finally just tired of walking around it. The latch was stiff. It took me both hands to get it open, and I remember the sound it made. This little metallic pop, like it had been holding its breath, and then I could smell it. I know that sounds strange, but you know how certain smells just take you somewhere? This was motor oil and metal, and something else, something I couldn't name right away, and then I realized it smelled like his hands, like the way his hands smelled when I was little and he'd come in from the garage to have dinner. I almost closed it back up right there. I'm not going to lie to you. I almost just put the drop cloth back on it and walked inside. But I didn't. The first thing I saw was a socket wrench. It was this big, heavy thing, chrome handle, worn down where he'd gripped it 1,000 times. And I picked it up and the weight of it just floored me because it was the exact weight I remembered. I remembered it from being maybe 7 years old, sitting on the garage floor, watching him work on a car and asking him what every single tool did and him explaining every single one patiently the way he always was. He never made me feel like I was annoying him. I asked a million questions and he answered every one. He said, if you understand how something works, you're never afraid of it. He really believed that. He applied it to everything. Cars, finances, medicine, people. He wanted to understand things. He wanted me to understand things. I set the socket wrench down on the workbench and took a breath. Underneath it, there was a tape measure, one of those yellow ones, the kind that retracts with a snap if you let it go too fast. I used to love that. I used to pull it out as a little kid just to feel it retract. He had a whole routine about measuring twice and cutting once. He said it to me so many times that eventually it stopped being about carpentry. He said it when I was thinking about changing majors. He said it when I was dating someone I probably shouldn't have been dating. Measure twice, cut once. I always thought he was just being corny. Looking back, I think that was just how he gave advice, wrapped in something ordinary, so it didn't feel like a lecture. There was a hammer, old wooden handle, the head a little rusty at the edges. He used that hammer to build me a bookshelf when I was 12. I had asked for one of those flat pack ones from the store, and he said, Why would I buy you something that'll fall apart in 3 years when I can build you something that'll last? I still have that bookshelf. It's in my daughter's room now. That hammer built the thing that's holding my daughter's books right now, and I'm just sitting in a garage holding it, crying a little, feeling like I am losing him all over again, which is the thing about grief that nobody really warns you about. It doesn't end. It just changes shape. If stories about parents, sacrifice, and second chances stay with you long after they're over, you're exactly where you belong here. There were 2 screwdrivers, a flathead and a Phillips, a box of miscellaneous screws and nails, each size in its own compartment the way he always organized things because he could not stand disorder. Work gloves, the leather kind, worn so thin in the palm they were almost translucent. I put one on. It was too big, of course. He had big hands. I always thought about that, how big his hands were compared to mine, even when I wasn't little anymore. I wore the glove for a minute and then put it back. Under the gloves there was a flashlight, old, heavy, the cylinder kind. I clicked it on just to see if it worked, and it did. Still had battery in it, and I almost laughed, because of course it did. He was meticulous about things like that. He checked the smoke detectors twice a year. He kept a spare tire actually inflated. He was the kind of man who was always quietly, invisibly, making sure things didn't fall apart. And I never fully appreciated that until he wasn't there to do it anymore. I set the flashlight down, and that's when I felt something shift. Because under the flashlight, there was a folded oil rag. And I don't know why, but something about the way it was folded, too neat, too deliberate for a garage rag, made me slow down, made me move it carefully. The way you move something when part of you already senses what's underneath is going to change everything. And underneath it was a photograph. Just one. No frame. The edges a little wavy from age. I turned it over and I had to look at it for a second before I understood what I was seeing. It was a truck. A 1970 Ford F-100, blue, cherry condition. And I knew exactly what truck that was, because I had heard about it my entire childhood. That was the truck he sold before I was born. He always talked about it, not in a sad way, just in the way people talk about something they used to love. He'd say, "I had the most beautiful truck once." He'd describe it, the color, the sound of the engine, the way it felt to drive it down an empty road, and then he'd trail off and change the subject. I always assumed he sold it because he needed the money, or traded up, or life moved on. I never thought to ask. You never think to ask the things that actually matter until it's too late. I turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. His handwriting. This particular cramped but careful cursive that I'd recognize anywhere. It said, "Sold March 1989, just that. No explanation, and I just stared at it. March 1989. That was the year I was born. March was the month I was born. And right then, my brain went somewhere I did not expect it to go. Because when you find a hidden photograph in your dead father's toolbox, with a cryptic date written on the back, your mind doesn't immediately go somewhere warm. I started thinking, why would he hide a photograph of a truck? Why would a man keep something like this concealed for 30 years? Was there something about this truck I didn't know? Was there something about that time in his life, 1989, before I arrived, that he never told anyone? I started building theories I'm not proud of. Was there a debt he was hiding? Was there a person connected to that truck? Someone he didn't want us to know about? Could there have been a whole part of his life that existed before us, separate from us, that he had quietly locked away? I feel strange admitting that. I feel strange telling you that my first instinct, holding my father's photograph in my father's garage, was suspicion. But that's the truth. That's exactly where my mind went. And then I kept looking. Because there was more. If you found a letter your parent never meant you to see, would you read it? Just sit with that for a second. Because I'm about to tell you what I found next, and I don't think I'll ever be fully done processing it. My hands were shaking a little, not dramatically, just that quiet kind of trembling you get when something inside you knows before your brain does. I kept moving things, looking. and then I felt it. Along the bottom of the toolbox, inside, there was a seam, a small ridge. I ran my thumb along it, and part of the floor of the toolbox shifted slightly, and I thought, no. I thought, that's just the metal warping. But I pushed on it and it lifted, this thin, false bottom panel, maybe an inch deep, just wide enough to hold a few folded things. I just sat down on the garage floor. Not because my legs gave out, I just needed to be lower to the ground. I sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, the toolbox between my knees, and I looked at what was inside. One envelope, sealed, my name on the front in his handwriting. One old key, small, silver, the kind that goes to a safe deposit box. A safe deposit box that nobody in my family, not my mother, not my brother, not anyone, had ever known existed. And tucked beneath both of them, another photograph. This one of me. I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, sitting on the hood of a car in our driveway, squinting into the sun and laughing at something out of frame. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I thought about the version of me in that picture, the version who didn't know anything yet, who still had her dad, who still had time. And then I looked at the envelope. I didn't open it right away. I want to be honest about that. I held it for probably 15 minutes. I turned it over. I held it up to the light to see if I could see through it, which I couldn't. I thought about the truck photograph and the date on the back and the theories I'd been building, the dark ones, and I tried to prepare myself. And I thought about the key, a safe deposit box that no one knew about. In a family where my dad told us everything, or I thought he did, a secret account, a secret box. Something hidden so carefully that it survived 8 years after his death without anyone finding it. My coffee had gone cold. I'd brought a cup out to the garage and completely forgotten about it. There was dust in it. I remember thinking, Dad would have been very bothered by that. He would have said something. And then I opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten on yellow legal paper. The kind he always used. He had a yellow legal pad on his desk, for as long as I could remember, always half filled with notes about things he was planning, tracking, projects, and lists. 3 pages, front and back, close writing. The date at the top was June 2012. I was 23 years old in June 2012. I had just graduated college 2 months before. I was starting a new job. I was building a life. And he was sitting somewhere writing me a letter and putting it in a hidden compartment and never saying a word. He didn't start it with Dear Maggie. He started it with, I've been trying to figure out how to say this for 23 years, so I'm just going to say it. And that was so him. That was so completely, absolutely him that I had to put the letter down and look at the garage ceiling and just breathe. He wrote about the truck. He wrote about selling it in March of 1989, 2 weeks before I was born, because they needed the money for the hospital bills, and because my mother wasn't sure her job was secure, and because he did the math, and the math said they needed a cushion. He said he never told me because he didn't want me to feel like I owed him something. He didn't want me to grow up carrying someone else's sacrifice. Those were his exact words. He didn't want me carrying it. The dark theories I'd been building in my head, the debt, the secret, the hidden life, they dissolved in about 30 seconds. There was no mystery person. There was no hidden shame. The truck photograph was in that box because it was the first thing he ever gave up for me. He kept it to remember. He hid it because he never wanted me to know. Every one of my dark suspicions, every uncomfortable place my mind had gone in the last 20 minutes, it was all wrong. It was exactly the opposite of what I feared. The secret wasn't something he'd done to us. It was something he'd done for me. But the truck wasn't what the letter was really about. The truck was just where it started. Because after the truck, he wrote about other things. He wrote about a second job he worked when I was in middle school, an overnight security job on weekends that I knew about but never thought much about, because he always said he just liked having something to do. He wrote that he'd been saving the money from that job into a separate account. And then he wrote that when I was applying to colleges, there was a school I wanted to go to that would have cost more than we could afford, And I'd come home one night upset about the financial aid package, and the next day he'd called the school and made up the difference from that account. He never told me. I thought a better aid package had come through. That's what he told me. That's what I believed for 12 years. He paid for it himself and told me it was financial aid. I sat there on the garage floor reading that, and I didn't cry right away. It was too big for that. I just kept reading. He wrote about my wedding. There was a string quartet we almost didn't have because the budget was tight. And it appeared because, he wrote, he'd told my mother he was returning some old tools he never used and got a refund. He returned the tools. I used to make fun of him when I was little for keeping things too long, for saying he'd use something someday. I teased him about it, and he used that stuff to pay for the music at my wedding. I still hear those songs sometimes. I heard one in a restaurant last year and had to leave the table. I didn't know why until this moment. The letter went on. A medical bill he'd quietly paid when I thought insurance had covered it. A time he'd driven 4 hours to help me move, hadn't told me he was coming, just showed up. Money he'd put in my mailbox when I was between jobs and too proud to ask, knowing I'd figure out it was him, knowing I'd never bring it up and being fine with that. He said, "You were so determined to do everything yourself. I was so proud of you for that, but I wanted to help anyway. That's what parents want to do. We just want to help anyway." He wrote about things he was sorry for too. He was not a perfect man. He could be withdrawn. He wasn't always there in the way I needed him to be when I was a teenager. There were years where we barely talked, where I was angry and he was closed off, and we just existed in the same house without really connecting. He wrote about that. He said he knew it happened, and he knew he should have done better, and he wanted me to know he knew, that it wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he didn't know how to say the things he felt. He said, "I never learned how to do that. Your grandmother didn't either. I'm sorry I passed that on to you. You deserved a father who could tell you he loved you without it feeling like pulling teeth. I love you. I've always loved you." I should have said it more. The last paragraph was short. He said the key was to a safe deposit box at a bank about 20 minutes from our house. He said there was something inside for me that he'd been holding on to since I was born, and that he hoped by the time I found it, I'd know what to do with it. He said he didn't know when I'd find the letter. He said he hoped it was because he was an old man, and I was just cleaning out his things and we got to laugh about it together. He wrote, "If that's not how it went, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I thought we had more time. I don't know how long I sat on that floor. Long enough for the afternoon light to shift all the way across the concrete and go dim. My husband found me sitting there with the letter in my lap and didn't say a word. Just sat down next to me and waited. That's the kind of person he is. I think my dad would have liked him more than he ever let on." The next day, I went to the bank. The key worked. Inside the box, there was a smaller envelope, and inside that envelope was a letter from 1989, the year I was born, and a passbook from a savings account. He'd been putting money in since the month I was born. Small amounts at first, $10, $20, but steadily, over 32 years, it had grown into something I was not expecting. He'd never touched it, not when things were tight, not when he could have used it. He left it there for me. The 1989 letter was shorter. He must have written it when I was just a few weeks old. The handwriting was younger, less steady. He wrote, "I don't know what your life is going to look like. I don't know who you're going to become, but I want you to have a start that isn't hard. I want you to have a little more runway than I did. I sold the truck for you. It was the right thing. I don't miss it anymore. I have something better now." I've been thinking about that for 8 weeks. The socket wrench and the tape measure and the gloves worn thin in the palm, the bookshelf in my daughter's room, the music at my wedding, the financial aid that was never financial aid at all. How many times I must have sat across from him at the dinner table, asked how he was doing, heard him say, "Fine, everything's fine," and believed him and moved on. And he just kept doing all of it, quietly, in the background, without asking for anything back. If this story reminded you of someone you still have time to call, don't wait, please. I mean that. I didn't know him the way I thought I knew him. I thought I knew him and I loved him, and I missed him, and all of that is still true. But there was a whole other version of him I was only meeting now, through a letter in a toolbox, 8 years too late to tell him. The hardest part isn't even the grief. The hardest part is the gratitude. Loving someone that much, understanding them that fully, only after you've run out of time to say it. The toolbox is still in the garage. I cleaned it up, put the tools back, left the hidden compartment open because I wanted to remember it. Some mornings I go out there before anyone else is up and I sit with a coffee and I just look at it. I don't always cry. Sometimes I just sit there and it's quiet and I think about all the things that are still holding me up that I can't see. Some fathers leave money. Mine left a life he had quietly been building for me. One overnight shift, one return tool, one $10 deposit at a time, while I was busy living it and never once wondering how. The bookshelf is still standing. All these years later, the one he built so it would last. It's still standing.